Followed by options. In this lecture, we'll start to get hands-on with some CLI commands. In the next few lectures, I'll introduce you to the Databricks command. The Databricks CLI is a utility that lets you automatically use your Databricks platform from your terminal or command prompt. You can execute commands directly from the command line without the need for a graphical user interface. It lets you do a range of things, from creating clusters, deleting workspace objects, getting job run information, and much more. So why is this useful? One of the main advantages and use cases being automation and reproducibility. The Databricks CLI enables the automation of tasks such as programmatically creating and configuring Databricks clusters and ensuring the reproducibility of your work environment. So for example, by using CLI commands in scripts or workflows, you can automate the setup of consistent and reproducible Databricks objects, such as clusters, streamlining your workflow and reducing the potential for inconsistencies or manual errors. You'll also see later on in this course that the CLI seamlessly integrates with CI/CD pipelines. CI/CD stands for Continuous Integration and Continuous Deployment. It's a software development practice that involves automatically integrating code changes into a shared repository and continuously deploying those changes to production environments. I'll discuss this in a later section, and you'll see how the CLI can help with this. Okay, so in short, the Databricks CLI lets you interact with your Databricks resources using a terminal or command prompt, and in the upcoming lectures, I'll give you some demos of this in practice. Before I get you set up on the Databricks CLI, let me run through some common commands that you can use on your terminal or command prompt to navigate between directories. If you're using a Mac operating system, then open your terminal. If you're using a Windows operating system, then open your command prompt. I'm on a Mac, so I'll open my terminal. On the side of my terminal, I'll have the Windows and Mac commands for your reference. Okay, so first of all, to get an idea of the current directory that you're in, you can type pwd on a Mac. If you're on a Windows, type cd. So I'll type pwd since I'm on a Mac. And this is my current directory. I'm on the root directory. To list all the folders in your current directory, you type ls on a Mac or dir on Windows. I'll type ls. These are all the folders and files in the root directory. To navigate to a different directory, you type cd, followed by a white space, and then the path to the new directory. This can be an absolute path or relative to the current directory. So if I want to go to the desktop directory, I can type cd space desktop. And now I'm in the desktop. To list all the contents of the current directory, which is now desktop, you can type ls. Remember, on a Windows, you would type dir. So these are the contents of my desktop. And as you can see, this aligns with these files here and folders. This external storage is not displayed. To go up one directory, you can type cd space dot dot. On a Windows, you don't have a space, so you type cd dot dot. Since I'm on a Mac, I have a space. And now I'm back to the root directory, which I can confirm by typing pwd. And again, on Windows, it would be cd. So as you can see, I'm back on the root directory. So let me go back to the desktop by typing cd desktop. Okay, so now, if you type cd, either on a Mac or a Windows, you will go back to the root directory. So if I type cd, I'll go back to this root directory here. So let's confirm this. And now, print the working directory. As you can see, I'm back on the root directory. Great, so these are some super basic commands that will allow you to navigate to different directories. I'll share a link with other useful commands, and you can review that in your own time. As we'll be using the command line interface, I just wanted to show you these basic commands. In this lecture, I'll help you set up the Databricks CLI and install it on your machine. So Mac users, open up your terminal, and Windows users, open up your command prompt. So first, you need to run pip install Databricks-CLI. This will install the CLI library. To check that it's installed properly, type Databricks-version. And as you can see, this is my current version. Okay, so we've installed it. And now we need to set it up so that it's authenticated against our Databricks environment. So type the following: Databricks configure token. So --token. Databricks configure --token. And press enter. It will then ask you for your Databricks host URL. This is the URL of your Databricks workspace. So the Databricks workspace URL is everything up to and including .net. So everything after this slash can be excluded. So copy this, go back to your terminal, and paste in the URL. And you can remove the slash if you accidentally copied that, and press enter. It will now ask you for a token, as you can see here, so we can quickly set this up. This is asking specifically for a personal access token. In Databricks, a personal access token is a secure authentication mechanism used to access the Databricks environment. It's a string of characters that serves as a credential, granting permissions to perform actions or to retrieve information from a Databricks workspace. To generate a personal access token, go to User Settings, and then here you can see Access Tokens, and click on Generate New Token. This token is specific to my user account. Different users can generate different tokens. So give the token a name in the comment, so I'll just say Databricks CLI because that's what I'm using it for, and give it a lifetime amount of days. So as you can see, you can keep it indefinitely if you want, but I'll just keep the default of 90 days. And then click on Generate. What this will do is it will generate the token. Make sure you copy this, because once you click Done, you won't be able to access it again. Back in your terminal, paste that in, and when you do, you won't be able to see the value. Don't worry about that, just press Enter. And now that seems to have worked. So behind the scenes, what's happened is when you've provided this token and you've configured the access using that token, your credentials are stored in a file in your system, so you won't need to enter this information again. But if you need to change your token, you can type Databricks configure token again and go through the same process. So to confirm this is working, we can just type Databricks clusters list. And now as you can see, I've got a list of all of the clusters that I've used. The majority of these are job clusters. However, this cluster is the compute cluster that I created. So as you can see, this is working. We've installed the Databricks CLI, and we've authenticated it using a personal access token to our Databricks environment. And we've confirmed it's working by listing all of the clusters in our Databricks workspace. The commands, specifically relating to clusters. I have my terminal open since I'm on a Mac. Windows users, please open your command prompt. Because we've already set up the CLI and provided our personal access token, all of this information is stored in your local machine, so you don't need to authenticate again until your token expires. So first of all, let's get help with respect to the Databricks CLI. So we can type Databricks-H, which is short for help. Great. So what's useful is here you can see the usage. So you type Databricks followed by options, followed by the command, and then additional arguments. And here are all of the commands. For this lecture, I'm interested specifically in clusters. So let's get help on the cluster commands by typing Databricks clusters-H. So now we have some help relating to the Databricks clusters commands, and you can see the usage here. So you type Databricks clusters followed by optional arguments, and then the command, and then the additional cluster commands are listed here, followed by additional arguments. So let's use this list command, and as you can see, this lists active and recently terminated clusters. So let's get help on this command. So first, let me clear my screen and type Databricks clusters list-h to get help on this command. Great. So you can see the usage here. You just type Databricks clusters list, and then you can specify options if you want, and here are the options. But first, let me just list all of the clusters without any options. So let me type Databricks clusters list. As you can see, all of the clusters in my Databricks environment are displayed. Most of them are job clusters. However, the one on the top is my all-purpose compute cluster. Now let's specify an option here. I want the output to be in JSON format. By default, as you can see, it's in this tabular format. So let me clear the screen and type Databricks clusters list, and then output, and I'd like the output to be in JSON. And now as you can see, all of the clusters are displayed in JSON format. As you can see, I have to scroll quite a lot to get back to my original command. Okay, so now let's see all of the cluster commands again. So I'll clear my screen and type Databricks clusters and get help. Great, so these are all of the cluster commands. So now I'm particularly interested in this get command. This get command retrieves metadata about a cluster. So I can type Databricks clusters get-h to get help on this command. And the usage is like so. You type Databricks clusters get followed by options. Now to get metadata about a specific cluster, you need to specify at least the cluster ID or the cluster name. So let's list all of our clusters again and get information about one of them. So let me clear my screen and type Databricks clusters space list. And I want information about this cluster, so I can specify the name here or the ID. Let me start by specifying the name. So I can type Databricks clusters get, and then this is the cluster name. So I can type cluster name, and then in quotes specify the cluster name. And now we get information about this cluster, which is my all-purpose compute cluster. Here's the ID. Then you've got the creator information, and then details about the cluster as well, such as the auto-termination time in minutes and so on. So let me clear the screen, and this time, instead of specifying the name, I'll specify the ID. So I can type Databricks clusters get, and then cluster ID, and then specify the ID. Actually, I've got an extra quote there, so let me get rid of that and press enter. And we get the same information again. Great. So now let's see some of the other commands again. So let me clear my screen and type Databricks clusters-h. Okay, so now let's look at this start command. This starts the terminated Databricks cluster, provided you give its ID. So let's get help on this start command. Databricks clusters start-h. Okay, so the usage is to type Databricks cluster start, followed by optional arguments. One of the options is to specify the cluster ID. So of course, you at least need to specify the cluster ID so that the CLI knows which cluster to start. Let's use the ID of our all-purpose compute cluster. And we can get that by clearing the screen and typing Databricks clusters list. And this is the ID. So now to start this cluster, I can type Databricks cluster start, and then specify as the option the cluster ID as follows. And now this should start this cluster. So before I run this command, let's go to my Databricks workspace. So I'm in my Databricks workspace, and this is the cluster that I'm about to start. Notice the current state is that the cluster has stopped. So let's go back to my terminal and execute that command. So let me run this command. And actually I've got a syntax error here where I should say clusters start. So let me just correct that. And press enter. And that's worked because nothing has been output. So now let's go back to my Databricks workspace, and notice now the cluster has started. So using the Databricks CLI, we have started a cluster. Let me manually terminate it. So for the last example, I'll show you how to create a cluster. To do that, you need to specify additional information about the cluster configuration. So I'm in the official Databricks CLI documentation, which of course I'll link. On the side here, you can click on clusters to get the cluster commands. So as you can see here, there's information about creating a cluster. So this just specifies information on how to create a cluster. You type Databricks clusters create, and then as an option, you specify the link to a JSON file. And that is this create-cluster.json file. But you can name the file whatever you want. The contents of that file should contain the configuration settings for that cluster. So back in my Databricks workspace, let me click on my all-purpose compute cluster. You can get the JSON settings for the configuration of that cluster by clicking here under JSON. And here are all of the configuration settings. So I can copy this into a text file on my desktop and modify it a little bit. So I've opened a text file, and I'll paste in the configuration for that cluster. For the cluster name, I'll change that to the API cluster, because I need to give it a different name. And notice here there's also a cluster ID. I'll remove this, because the cluster ID will be allocated when this cluster is created. So I'll save this in my desktop, and I'll call it cluster config. And I'll save it as a txt file, not as a JSON file. So click on save. And that's in my desktop, as you can see. Okay, so I'm back in my terminal, and first of all, let's make sure that our terminal is in the same directory as the configuration file. So let's see the current directory. So as a Mac user, you type pwd. Windows users would type cd. So I'll type pwd, and I'm currently in my root directory. I'm not in my desktop. Let's list the contents of this directory. So Mac users type ls, Windows users type dir. So I'll type ls. And as you can see, here's my desktop. So let's navigate to the desktop directory. cd space desktop. And now let's list the contents. And as you can see, here is my cluster configuration file. So now we can create the cluster by referencing this cluster configuration file. So I can type the following: Databricks, clusters, create, -JSON, -file, and then specify this cluster config.txt file. This file can have a JSON extension or a TXT extension, it doesn't matter, as long as the contents are in JSON format, and you can give the file whatever name you like. So now let's run this. And that's worked, because as an output, we've got the ID of the cluster we just created. So let's remember this, 0610. So now back in my Databricks workspace, you can see the new cluster is starting up, and the source is API, because we've done this via the Databricks CLI. And now when I click on this, and I go to the JSON settings, notice the ID 0610. So in this lecture, we've used the Databricks CLI to perform a range of commands in relation to clusters. And like I mentioned, the commands are explained in detail in this documentation. There's no point in me going over every single command, because they're all quite straightforward, and the documentation is extensive. So if there's anything you want to do, such as resize the cluster, click here, and look at the documentation. In the same format, and the documentation is pretty extensive. So if you click on any section, it will tell you what you can do, and then you can click into any bit and review the documentation and the syntax. Since I've covered clusters in the last lecture, in this lecture I'll cover workspace commands. This lecture, in addition to the previous lecture, should give you a really good idea of how to use the CLI, and then the rest is transferable to the different areas of Databricks. So with that being said, we'll be performing commands on the workspace using the workspace CLI. What we'll do in this section is we will list the objects in our workspace, create a directory in our workspace, and then delete that directory from our workspace as well. Okay, so I'm in a terminal, and I will get help on the Databricks workspace commands. So I can type Databricks workspace -h. So as you can see, here's the usage again, and here's the commands. Let's get help on the list command. This list command lists objects in the Databricks workspace. So I can type Databricks workspace list -h. Now as you can see, here's the usage. So in addition, you can specify options and then a workspace path. Here are some of the options. So absolute displays the absolute paths, then long displays the full information, and then ID displays the object ID. So for now, I won't use any of these additional options. I'll just specify a workspace path. So let's say I want to list the contents of my own user folder. So to do that, I can type Databricks workspace list, and then just specify the path to my folder, which is under users, and then my email address, which is azure.mv14@gmail.com. And then once I enter, you can see the contents of that directory, and that just contains one folder, which is the course resources folder. Okay, so now let me specify some of the optional arguments. I'll add absolute, long, and ID to get the absolute path of the object, the full information, as well as the ID. So I will just add --, absolute, --, long, --, ID. And now, as you can see, in the output, we've got the absolute path here. So not just the name anymore, it's the absolute path. We've got the object ID, and we've got additional details as well. Okay, so now let's check out the commands again. Databricks workspace -h. Let's make a directory by using the mkdirs command. This makes directories in the Databricks workspace. Before I do that, let's go to my Databricks workspace. So I'm in my Databricks workspace, and in my folder, you can see at present there's only one directory, and that is the Databricks course resources folder. So let me create a folder here called folder1. So to do that, let's get help on the make_dirs command. So Databricks workspace mkdirs -h. Now as you can see, here's the syntax. You just specify options and then the workspace path. So I'm not going to use any of the options, I'll just specify the workspace path. So I'll press clear, and then I'll do Databricks workspace mkdirs, and then specify the path. So the path I want is my user path, and then I want the folder to be called folder1. So let's press enter. And that's worked. So actually, it's been created here by mistake, because I specified user instead of users. So let me just correct that. So notice here I typed user instead of users. So if I go back and change this to users, now notice here is folder1. So let me now create another folder within folder1 called folder2.
What is your phone?
This command and add a slash and then folder2 and press enter. So now let's just go back. Notice folder2 has been created. So let's just add a couple of notebooks in each folder.
Okay, money.
And now what I want to do is I want to delete this entire directory. So let me actually move this inside of folder2. So I've got a folder inside of folder2 and a notebook inside of folder1. And I want to delete folder1. So to do that, let's check out the workspace commands again in our terminal. So I can type Databricks workspace -h. So notice we need this rm command, which deletes objects from the Databricks workspace. So I can type Databricks workspace rm and get help on that. So I've actually got a typo, so let me just try again. Great, so here's the help. So you just specify the workspace path that you'd like to delete. However, we also need this option for recursive. The reason we need this is because the folder itself has got contents within it. So let me show you without actually specifying recursive. We'll get an error. So the path is users, and then my email, and then folder 1. So notice, directory not empty. So what we have to do is specify the option -- recursive. This means that it will delete the contents of each of the subfolders as well within this folder. So let's press enter. And now that's worked because we've not got any error message. So now in Databricks, notice, a folder has been deleted. Great. So like I said, to see additional information on the Databricks CLI commands, such as the workspace commands, please review this documentation. Everything I've covered on workspace commands is included here. As you can see, here's the information on deleting objects from your workspace. Since we've covered clusters and workspaces in this lecture and the previous lecture, please review some of the other areas in your own time. So for example, if you want information on jobs, you can review that here as well. So it tells you how to create a job, delete a job, use information about a job, and so on. CI/CD is a practice that allows the development and operations teams to streamline the development process, automate testing, and ensure rapid and reliable delivery of software and code. The CI in CI/CD stands for continuous integration. This involves planning, coding, building, and testing. CD stands for continuous delivery or continuous deployment. This involves releasing, deploying, operating, and monitoring. This is a continuous cycle. I should point out that continuous delivery or continuous deployment are terms that are used interchangeably, but continuous delivery means automating the delivery process up to the point of readiness for deployment, while continuous deployment takes the automation a step further by automatically deploying the software to production environments after it passes all of the necessary tests. The objective of continuous integration is to enable multiple developers to work on the same code base simultaneously and ensure that their changes are integrated smoothly. It involves automatically merging code changes, building the application or code base, and running automated tests to identify any integration issues early on. The objective of continuous delivery is to automate the process of deploying software to different environments, such as testing and production. Continuous deployment ensures that the software is ready for deployment at any time by automating the necessary steps, such as building, packaging, and deploying the application or code. So here's an illustration of how CI/CD could work for our needs. Whenever a developer pushes code via a pull request into a specific branch in Azure repos, let's say our main branch, then Azure DevOps will trigger the CI/CD pipeline. This is automatic and works with the help of a build pipeline, where our code is compiled and artifacts are created. An artifact refers to a compiled or packaged version of your code, where the source code is transformed into a deployable format. So in our case, since we're developing notebooks, that's what is packaged up as an artifact. As part of the build pipeline, we can also perform automated testing, such as unit tests. Everything up to this point is the continuous integration stage. After the build pipeline, we move to the test stage. In this stage, our code is automatically deployed into the test environment for thorough testing via a release pipeline. This environment closely resembles the production environment, allowing us to catch any issues before deployment. Testing is a critical part of the software development process. By deploying the code into the test environment, we can perform various tests, including functional, integration, and performance tests. This ensures that our code meets the desired quality standards. Once the code passes all the tests in the test environment, the pipeline proceeds to the deployment stage via the release pipeline. Here, the code is deployed to the production environment, making it available to all end users. The deployment to test and production is the continuous deployment stage. In the following lectures, I will implement CI/CD with Azure DevOps and Databricks. The solution will be as follows. The development code will be stored in a remote Git repository. Whenever a pull request happens on the main branch, the build pipeline will be triggered. The code will then be deployed to the test environment. Finally, pending a manual approval, the code will then be deployed to the production environment. The test and production environments will not be stored in Git, but they will be in shared folders in our Databricks workspace. So in the following lectures, I'll perform a demonstration and walk you through all of the necessary steps for our solution. Just a reminder to ensure that you submit this form requesting parallelism in your Azure DevOps workspace. So I'll provide this link with this lecture. Hopefully you've already submitted this form when you took the previous section of the course, but if you didn't request this, then you'll have problems with your release pipelines. So please ensure you complete this, as it takes 2 to 3 business days to proceed the request. So provide your name and your email associated with your Azure DevOps account and the Azure DevOps organization. This can be found in Azure DevOps, so my organization is here. Please make sure you check private when requesting parallelism increase for public or private projects, and then submit. Build pipelines clone the code from associated repositories and build an artifact based on instructions that we provide. So as you know, I have a repository called Databricks project. This was created in the previous section. This is essentially my development code. What I want to do in this lecture is trigger a build pipeline anytime code is committed into the main branch of this repository or a pull request has completed. I want the source code, which is basically all of the code in this repo, specifically in the main branch, to be published as a pipeline artifact. This artifact will be published to a designated location each time the build pipeline is triggered. So each pipeline run will have its own published artifact. So to do that, on the repo, notice we have this button here that says Setup Build. We can click on that to configure our build pipeline. Or alternatively, we can go to Pipelines, under Pipelines, and create a build pipeline. So we need to specify where our code is, and it is in Azure Repos Git. So let's select our repository, and now under Configure, please select Starter Pipeline. So right away, as you can see, this generates some YAML. YAML stands for Yet Another Markup Language. YAML code is easy to understand for both humans and machines, making it accessible for configuration management, and that is why it's commonly used in Azure DevOps pipelines. In any case, we don't actually need to know how to code in YAML for this exercise, as everything we're doing uses a user interface and generates the YAML code for us. So there's some existing YAML code in the pipeline already, and let me explain what it is. First, we have trigger. This is set to main. So what this means is, anytime there's a change in the main branch, trigger this pipeline YAML. The pull section specifies the agent pool and virtual machine image configuration for the pipeline. In this case, the configuration VM image, Ubuntu latest, specifies that the agents in the pool should use the latest version of the Ubuntu operating system image available. We of course need an agent pool because we need it to execute the pipeline tasks. We can change this from Ubuntu latest to macOS latest or Windows latest, for example, but I'm happy with Ubuntu latest. Now after this, we have a list of steps. These are all individual tasks. However, these tasks specifically just output a little bit of text in the terminal. They don't actually do anything, so we can delete them if we want, but I'll keep them here to show you what they do when I run the pipeline. So now notice on the side here, we have show assistant. This contains additional tasks that we can add to our pipeline YAML. I want to add one more task that creates a pipeline artifact. So I will search for publish pipeline artifact here. So this is the task we need. So make sure your cursor is set to the end and then select the task. So for the file or directory path, this is the path of the artifact that we want to publish. It's set to $open parenthesis pipeline.workspace close parenthesis. This is a predefined variable in Azure Pipelines. It represents the local directory on the agent where the pipeline source code and artifacts are downloaded and stored during the pipeline's execution. We then give this artifact a name. I'll just call it notebooks. For the publish location, we can just publish it to the pipeline itself. And so we're done. And now we can add this task. And notice the task gets added to the bottom here. One final thing to note is that these tasks have names. We can modify them. We can also modify the display name. So now let me run the pipeline manually by clicking save and run. So it comes up with a custom commit message, and we will save and run. So notice the pipeline is running. So we can actually click on this job to get additional details. So now notice all of this is getting populated with information as it steps through each task. So let's examine each task. So this isn't necessarily a task per se, but it is initializing the job. And notice it is providing information such as the agent name, the agent machine name, the operating system, which is Ubuntu, and so on. And notice this task. The main branch of the repo was checked out to a folder named S. This is a dedicated folder for our source code. The next two tasks are just those command line tasks. So notice it just outputs the text hello world, and this one just outputs this text here. So they don't actually do anything, and we can actually delete these. But I just wanted to show you what they do. And now we have our publish pipeline artifact task. And then finally, we have a series of post-job checks, and the job is finalized. So now back to the job level. Notice here, we have the time, the duration, and here we can see the artifacts that were published. So let's click on this. Notice this is the name we provided for the artifact, which is notebooks. And now there's a folder called S. This is for our source code. And this contains all of the code in our repository. So now let me trigger this pipeline by updating the main branch. Just now, I manually triggered it, but I want to show you that it's actually triggered by an update to the main branch. So let me go to Databricks, under repos. I will create a new branch on my Databricks project repo, and I will just call it feature. And I'll just make a simple change on one of the notebooks. I'll just make that lowercase. So now let's commit that change. I'll just give it a quick commit message, commit and push. And now in my repos, I'll access the feature branch, and I'll create a pull request. I'll create that, and I'll complete the pull request. Great, so this is finalizing. Now notice, on the pipelines, we should have triggered a new pipeline run, which we have, as you can see here. So this was the previous run, which I manually triggered, and this one has triggered automatically. So let's click into it. And now as you can see, the job is running. And this was triggered just now. So now it's running through all of the steps again. And as you can see, everything is completed, and one artifact was produced. So here you can see the published artifact. And again, it's in the same S folder. So each pipeline generates its own artifact. And as you can see, so far, we have two runs of the pipeline. This pipeline was triggered when we saved it and set it up initially, and this one was triggered when we merged it with a pull request. One final thing I want to show you under repos is that we now have this YAML file. This YAML file just contains the pipeline YAML that was created as part of the build pipeline. This should not be deleted, as it contains all of the steps and tasks to trigger and run this pipeline. This is automatically saved to this repository. Great. So to summarize, we created a build pipeline using this YAML. We then added a build artifact task. So if I go to pipelines and then actually look into this, you can see here, we actually added a publish pipeline artifact task, where we published a pipeline artifact which consisted of our source code. Note, we can also add additional tasks, such as unit testing and other things. But for the purposes of this demo, and not to overload you with too many things, I'm going to keep it simple. But there are many different tasks you can add, such as command line tasks and tasks that can help you execute Python scripts. So for example, if I search Python here, you can find a task that runs a Python script. Or if I type command, you can see there is a bash script, a command line script, or if I search for bash, you can run a bash script as well. So obviously this will depend on what kind of image you're using. So for Ubuntu, you wouldn't be able to use PowerShell, for example, as you can see here. Great. So now that we have our build artifact that is published each time the pipeline runs, I'm going to deploy this into a test environment. So in simple terms, we'll be deploying this source code, which is packaged up as an artifact, into a new folder in our workspace, which will be our test environment. You can see here. Let's deploy this into a test environment. So we need to create a release pipeline. In summary, what we want to happen each time the build pipeline is triggered and an artifact is published, we want to deploy this artifact into our Databricks workspace. Specifically in Databricks, I want to deploy it in this test folder in the shared area here. So right now it's empty. So to do this, on pipelines, go to releases. Under new, click on new release pipeline. For the template, let's use an empty job template. So we have artifacts and stages. as you can see. As you know, artifacts are the output files or packages generated during the build process. Stages represent logical divisions or phases within a release pipeline. Each stage represents a distinct environment, such as development, staging, or production, where the artifacts are deployed and validated. Stages define the sequence and conditions under which deployment or release should happen. They can include tasks, approvals, or conditions to control the flow of artifacts from one stage to the other. So I can add another stage, like so, and notice stage 1 is triggered before stage 2, so let's just do that again with an empty job template. So now as you can see, stage 1 runs first, and then stage 3, and then you can add a post-deployment approval before the stage is triggered, and you can add pre-deployment conditions as well, but I will demonstrate that later. Okay, so we need to add an artifact that can be deployed to each of the stages. So click on Add an Artifact. For the source type, select Build, because we're getting this artifact from the build pipeline. It's important to specify the project. This is the repository, so it's Databricks project, and the source. So if you click on the drop-down, you can see that the source is Databricks project. And for the version, we should make sure we choose the latest version. This will be the artifact from the most recent build pipeline. And click on Add. So now let's modify stage 1 so that it's specific to our test environment. So click on the bit that says 1 job 0 task. If you click here, you'll just get an overview of the stage name. While I'm at it, let me actually just change the stage name to be test. So now let's click here. And notice you can also change the stage name here, up top here. On agent job, just like with the build pipeline, we need an agent to perform all the tasks. For this, we'll keep the hosted Windows agent by default. And if it's not that for you under agent pool, make sure you're using an agent with a Windows operating system, because one of the tasks we'll be using will need a Windows operating system. And then you can see additional agent settings. I will leave all of this as default. You can also display a name for your agent job. So for example, I could just change this to deploy notebooks to test, for example. And now we can add tasks to this agent job. So click on this plus icon here to add a task. And now you get a series of tasks here. So as you can see, there are loads of tasks we can perform. I want to perform tasks specific to Databricks. So let me search for Databricks. And as you can see, there are a series of tasks. Since this is your first time, you may need to continue scrolling down under Marketplace and adding these tasks. So these tasks might not be available here for you to use right away. So you'll need to go into Marketplace and quickly install them. And then they'll be available here. So these tasks are just the CLI tasks. They use the Databricks CLI to perform actions. So the first task must always be to configure the Databricks CLI before you can use any subsequent tasks. So let me add that. On this task, you get the configuration. You can give it a display name, and then you need to specify your workspace URL and an access token. So let me do that now. So we can get the workspace URL here and paste that in. We can also generate an access token by going to user settings and access tokens, generate new token. So I'll just call this token CICD, generate it, copy this value, and click done. And now paste in that value. Great, so we've configured the Databricks CLI, and now let's add a second task. Search for Databricks, and the task I'm looking for is Databricks deploy notebooks. Not this task, deploy Databricks notebooks. We specifically want this one. So let's click add. And notice these are in order. You can rearrange them. So if you want this to be performed first, you can. However, this won't work because you need to configure the CLI first. So let's move that back down. And now let's configure this. So you have a display name, and you need to specify yours your region. Do that in lowercase with no spaces. For me, it's UK South. You then need to specify the source files path. These are the files that you're deploying. If you click on the 3 dots, this should link to the build artifacts that we provided in the artifact stage. So now notice, if you go down, you can see the artifact name we provided, and specifically all of the folders and the notebooks are in this S folder. So select the S folder and click OK. And now you specify the target file path. So that is in our shared folder, specifically in the test subfolder. Please click this here, which cleans the workspace folder. This will remove any existing folders and notebooks from that folder prior to deployment. And finally, we need to specify a Databricks bearer token. This is the access token we just created. So paste that in. And now we're ready. So we're currently in the task view. Let's go back to the pipeline view. So now we've got 2 tasks in this test stage. And we're ready. So let's click on save. And OK. Actually, there's one more thing I want to show you as well. Notice this continuous deployment trigger. Let's click on that. We want this release pipeline to run anytime a change has happened in the main branch. So if we click on this, this will create a release every time a new build is available. So that's what we want. If we click here, then this will be triggered anytime a pull request happens. So they're both essentially the same. However, this should work even when you just commit directly into the main branch. Great. So now let's save this. And now what should happen is anytime there's a new build available, so anytime our build pipeline is triggered, we will also trigger this release pipeline. So to summarize, we've added our build artifact here, and then we've added a test stage, which deploys this artifact into the test folder of our shared workspace area. So let me trigger the pipeline. The way I can trigger the pipeline is going under repos, and specifically the main branch of this repo, and I can just edit a file. So let me just go to the feature C folder, and I'll go to this notebook, I'll click on edit, I will just make this a lowercase c, and I will commit this. Now notice, under pipelines, we have triggered the build pipeline. So we can click into this, and we can see here is the 3rd build pipeline. We can review the job and all of the tasks within that job here, and as you can see, the artifact has been produced, and the job is finishing. And if we go to releases, we can see that there is a new release pipeline here that has been triggered. So if I click into that, you can see this is in progress. So if I go to the logs, you can see it's currently deploying the notebooks for the test. It's already initialized the job and downloaded the artifacts. And now it's configuring the Databricks CLI, which is currently running. And that has succeeded, and now it's doing the Databricks notebook deployment. So notice if I go to Databricks on my workspace, in my test folder, right now there is nothing there. But once this task is finished, the notebooks will have been deployed to that folder. And now as you can see, that's completed. All of the tasks were successful. And if I go to Databricks, refresh this, under workspace, shared, test, you can see here are all of our folders and notebooks. So to summarize, in our pipeline, we've linked the build artifact that's created every time there is a change in the main branch of our repository. Once the build artifact is created, this then triggers this test stage, which deploys that artifact to our test environment, which is this folder here. And we have done that using the Databricks CLI tasks. you can see all of your releases when you click here. So this is release number 1 for this release pipeline, which is executing this test stage. You can obviously rename your release pipeline, so I can just give this a new name as well if I want to. So I will call this Databricks CI/CD demo, and then save this. And now when I go to releases, you can see here is that release pipeline. Notice this is for a previous release that I was testing, but this is the release that I just executed, and here is release number 1. And then under pipelines, this is our build pipeline. Okay, so we've created a release pipeline that deploys the build artifact to our test area. The idea here is that the testers will then perform various tests before the code is deployed to the production area. So what we'll do in this lecture is add another stage to our release pipeline that deploys the code to the production area. This is only after there's been a manual approval. The production area is in our Databricks workspace, specifically in the shared area in a folder called production. So notice right now it's empty, unlike our test folder, which has got all of the code from our repository. So under releases, select the release pipeline and click on edit. We could add a new stage by clicking on this plus icon, or we can clone this stage and have all of the tasks and jobs already there, and we can just modify that. So let me clone this stage, and the stage gets cloned after this first stage that it was copied off of. So click into that stage and let's rename that to production. And now let's click on the tasks, and under the first task, this is fine, we don't need to change anything. However, under the Databricks notebook deployment task, we need to change this from test to production, because we want the target file path to be in the production folder here. So that's why I've changed that, and that is all we need to do. Everything else is fine, and we're ready. So let's go back to the pipeline level, and now just before we actually run this production stage, I want to add a pre-deployment condition. So you can click here, and after the test stage, I want to add a pre-deployment approval, and I will be the one who approves this, as there's no one else in this DevOps account. So after the test stage, a manual approval will be required before the production stage can start. So let me save this release pipeline and then show you one more thing. So now, under the tasks, notice we have our access token and our workspace URL so that anyone can see it. Instead of revealing this URL and access token, we can assign it to a variable and pass in the variable. To create a variable, go to library, and then add a variable group. Give your variable group a name, so I'll just call it Databricks, and then you can specify variables. So give the name of your variable, so I'll add one variable called host, where I will paste in the URL of my workspace. And then I'll add another variable called pat, which is the personal access token, and I will paste that in as well. So now I have 2 variables. Let's save this. Now back in the release pipeline, let's click on edit. Under variables, we can link the variable group so that those variables are available for this pipeline. Note, we can add variables directly in the pipeline, but this will be at the pipeline level only. So let me link the variable group, and here it is. This is what I named it. And for the scope, I'll make it as part of the release. So as part of all stages, you can also specify just a specific stage where it's available as well, but I'm happy for it to be available in all stages. So I'll link it, and now at the task level, so I'm at the test task level, I can specify the variable by providing a $, and then inside of the parenthesis, specify the variable name. So for the workspace URL, it's host. For the access token, it's PAT. Great. So now let's go to the production tasks and do the same. Host, and then pat. Great. So now let's save the pipeline. So once we change the main branch of the repository, a build pipeline will be triggered, and that will generate a new artifact. The release pipeline will then deploy that code to the test folder via this test stage using these 2 tasks. After a manual approval, the production stage will then deploy the code to the production folder using these 2 stages. So let me trigger a change in the repo. So I'll do that just by accessing this notebook, clicking on edit, and making the C an uppercase again, and commit that change. So now we should have triggered a build pipeline, which as you can see we have, and here it is, and you can then click on the job to see all of the tasks, and that's completed, and the artifact has been produced. So now under releases, we should see a second release here, and this time there are 2 stages, so previously there was just the test stage, now there's the test and the production stage. So currently the test stage is in progress, so you can click into it, and then you can see all of the tasks here, under the logs. So it's currently configuring the Databricks CLI, and then it will deploy the notebooks to test. Okay, so the test stage has succeeded, and now notice the production stage is waiting for an approval first. So I can approve it here, or back in the release pipeline, I can click on the release, and then click on approve here. So let me click on approve, and now the production stage should also start. So let's go to logs, and as you can see, that's completed. And note, I should have changed this task name from deploy notebooks to test to deploy notebooks to production, but please excuse that. So as you can see, all of that's completed, and if I go to my Databricks workspace under production, you can see here are all of the folders and notebooks. So that's worked. So if you go to your releases, to date we have 2 releases, and then if you click into that release, you can see all of the additional details, such as the logs, and all of the other relevant information as well. So notice there were 2 warnings here, and the warnings were because of the file extensions. So the YAML file and the README file were skipped because they were not Databricks notebooks. So in this lecture, and in the previous 2 lectures, I've demonstrated how you can implement an end-to-end CI/CD pipeline, where you build an artifact out of the repository code and then deploy that to test and production environments. This demo is of course basic, because it's intended to show you the process. In a real-world project, you may have many more tasks that you're adding in your stages, such as deploying clusters and performing unit tests. You may also be deploying your code to a different workspace, so you might have a dedicated test workspace and a dedicated production workspace. But the objective here is to show you how CI/CD works, and that is best done with a simple illustration. So to wrap up, if you want to delete your repository, you can go to Manage Repositories, and then click on these 3 dots, and then delete the repository. If you want to delete your pipelines, you can locate the build pipelines by going to pipelines here, clicking on the three dots and clicking
కరెంట్ ఉంది.
delete. Similarly, for the releases, you can select the release pipeline, click on the three dots here and delete.
ప్లాస్టిక్ పట్టుకో.
You can also delete your Databricks repo once you've deleted the repository by clicking this down arrow and moving it to trash.